Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Today is an awesome day. I've been looking forward to this day for a while. We have special guest Onieh with us from Dead Sea Scrolls Religion, and looking forward to his presentation. He's going to be presenting his version of the Book of Esther. At least, it probably will end up going into part two tomorrow, but we're going to get a really good dose today. I'm looking forward to this. We've been looking forward to this for some time. So make sure you invite your friends. Make sure you, hey, I mean, ask God. Is there anyone that any family member or any friend that I know of that would be interested in tuning in and listening to this? So, if so, just send them an invite. Send them a link to this live stream, and the more the merrier. Amen. So I will introduce Onieh in just a moment. Just before that, just to see what's in the live chat, we have Jay Michael says, "What's up? What's up? Welcome, welcome. Good to see you. Shalom." Calamentos says, Shabbat Shalom all. Shabbat Shalom, Calamentos. Billy says, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Billy, welcome, welcome. Psalm 94 says, Shabbat Shalom. And David says, Shabbat Shalom. Amen, amen. Welcome, welcome, everyone. All right, so just want to introduce Onieh. He has a very, very interesting and very content-rich channel on YouTube. This is actually how I first come across his material, was on YouTube. I know a lot of you who know him from Facebook as well, but he's got a YouTube channel called Dead Sea Scrolls Religion. I have I left the links to his channel in the description, as well as his Facebook group as well. And so some very, very interesting material there. Just awesome stuff. So without any further ado, shalom, shalom, Onieh, welcome.
Shalom, everyone. Great to be back.
Shalom, shalom. All right, so just a moment here. I'm just going to turn it over to Onieh. Let's see here. Yeah, so if you want to, Onieh, if you want to while I'm setting up here, if you just want to give a little short introduction into what you're doing, and um, I'll just set this up for a screen share.
Okay. Yeah, I did send you most of the links. And I apologize. Uh, going.
Okay, I'm not sure. It seems like Onieh's connection here is a little bit slow. Onieh, I'm not sure if you hear me or not, but is on my end anyway. There is some connection issues. So just let me know. Anybody in the live chat, if
I
Onieh
can.
froze on you, let me know.
I'm sure I did because my computer is actually, it's telling me I have connection issues. I'm just trying to see if there's stuff I can close to make it easier. Uh, okay, let's see. Hopefully that'll help. So I did send you links. There's one PDF I'm gonna send you, but show first. So basically, I have this Bible project that I've been wanting to do for years. I've had this goal to make my own version of the Bible since around the year 2009. It was due to my conviction that there's a bunch of other books outside of the Bible, because around 2009 was when I started discovering the Apocrypha books. And So I was like, the Bible as we know it is missing some of God's words. So I felt compelled to make my own version of the Bible. This desire became reinforced far more once I began to see the many differences between the manuscript copies of books of the Bible themselves, not just apocrypha, like not just books being left out, but the books being included having very different readings depending which manuscript copy it's based on. And most people are not familiar with the manuscript differences. So it has been my goal to make a version that best incorporates or best showcases those differences for the reader. That's been over 10-year goal, and it still hasn't even come to fruition, not even close. But over the years, I've been studying a lot, and that is important to lay the groundwork for the project. So I've been trying to learn the languages. I haven't mastered them yet, but I have a lot of working knowledge of Hebrew, and not as much, but some knowledge of Greek as well. So because of that, I am far closer to the realization of this project. And so um, I have a I have devised a several part process to my Bible project for each book. Now I'm starting with Old Testament, including Old Testament Apocrypha, but Old Testament books, and starting with the Hebrew books, or the books that are preserved in Hebrew copies, because it's much harder to do what I'm trying to do when we don't have a Hebrew text we can compare to. So I'm starting connection, uh, starting with the Old Testament.
Okay, it seems like Onieh is breaking up a little bit again here. Um, Again, Onieh, I'm not sure if you hear me or not, but on my end, you're pretty much frozen again. Um,
Connection
okay,
fixes
I could
itself.
hear, I could barely hear the word connection. So I think you're, yeah. Just wondering, Onieh, if you realize that the connection is okay. We're
Yeah,
back here.
I don't know why it's coming in and out. We did switch internet recently, and I don't know if that is the basis. So we were with Spectrum, and then we switched to Verizon. Now, in the past, we've had better connection from Verizon. Uh, so I don't know if it's the Verizon itself or if it's just my computer being, uh, you know, having too much stuff on it. I don't know. But if it keeps happening, I'll keep trying to close more stuff each time. So, um, so basically, there's a 3-part process to how I'm doing this. So I have a friend that I am paying to help me with part one. Part one is taking English translations that already exist as the basis of the comparison, the initial comparison, to give me a overarching framework from where to work with, to start from, to give myself a good approximation of the differences. So what I have been having him do is for each Old Testament book, he's been going through, he takes the King James Version, English translation, and he takes the English translation of the Brenton translation of the Septuagint, and he'll put those underneath each other, and he'll try to line them up and mark them. The problem is that it's the translations are often very different, so it's hard to line them up sometimes. but he's done the best he could with what I assigned to him. And so he's actually gone through, I'm not sure if I would say half the Old Testament or a third, because he's gone through a large number of the books, but he's started with some of the shorter books. So a bunch of the shorter books have been completed for part one, step one. But the longer ones, Psalms, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, and the Torah itself, those major big ones have not been done yet because those are more complicated for what I'm trying to do. The prophets have all been done. We're starting to go into the wisdom books now. So he's currently working on Ecclesiastes. But so I, in advance, for preparation for this presentation on Esther, I told him to work on the Book of Esther. So he went through Book of Esther for me. Connection again.
Okay, so while the connection is a little bit spotty here, I'm just going to greet everyone. I know I displayed this here a few minutes ago, but just welcome everyone. Welcome, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Vinny. Yeah, Shabbat Shalom, Shalom, Tammy. Good to see you. Vinny, by the way, is from Australia, so he set his alarm for 4 a.m. Awesome. Absolutely amazing. Welcome, Vinny. I pray that each and every one that's listening to this will be incredibly blessed by what is going to be shared and what we're going to talk about. And I pray the connection quality will get ironed out here. The wrinkles here would be ironed out. So pray for that. Okay, Onieh, looks like you're.
If it keeps happening, yeah, it like goes off and then comes back. And like I said, each time I'll try to close stuff, but it doesn't seem to be helping that much when I close things. But if it keeps happening, what I could do is go on my phone. It would be a little bit annoying to do it on my phone, but I would just come in on the phone, and because you'd be sharing the screen most of the time anyway, so it wouldn't be too big of a deal. So we will do that if it just keeps up. So I had him working on Esther for me. He finished it, and so then I started, which is step two. Step two is going through what he did and fixing it, basically, doing editing and largely redoing everything he did. But lining it up much more closely, changing the wording to reflect more of what the Hebrew says. Because when I say changing the wording of the English translations, because sometimes the English translations make it look like they're different readings, but they're not actually different readings. It's just translating more loosely. Like one translation might say people, the other says men. It's actually the same, but it's more trying to translate it as people or whatever, So there's things like that I look at, and I'm also looking at the Hebrew text to see if the King James version is being translated incorrectly. So sometimes there's things that seem to not be in the Hebrew that are in the Septuagint, or differences that seem to be in the Septuagint version. But when you actually look at the Hebrew, it says the same thing that the Septuagint translation is saying. So when that happens, occasionally, I will change the translation to reflect the Septuagint reading, because it's the same text, and and the only difference is just in the translation of the King James. So there was a few things like that I did to show how they are saying the same text. So I'm gonna load that in just a second. So if you want, Christopher, could you open the documents in tabs? Not necessarily share the screen at the moment, but just opening the tabs.
Okay,
So
so
you have
you
it
say
ready.
you say documents. I
Okay. So I sent one document to you. Did it receive?
I got it, and it's ready to go.
Okay, and then there's also in that same message there's instructions to find 2 other documents. I didn't want to go to the trouble of downloading documents.
Okay.
When I get back
Okay. So
with the connection,
just to clarify here, so the one document is the PDF that you sent me. The other ones are on the internet. Is that it? Okay.
there are instructions to find them on Google. So my connection's good at the moment. You know, in the past when we've been doing these things, where sometimes the way you have it formatted would slow it down. Is there a way to see if we change that like you did last time? See if there's any improvement.
Okay, I can try it like this.
We could try it like that and see if that makes it better. But if it still has the connection issue, then obviously that's not the reason. But let's try this for now just to see if this helps at all. Yeah, so I sent instructions to find 2 other PDF files because I didn't want to go through the process of finding the PDF files on my computer and then attaching them. So the one is you just type in Google Nets English translation. You guys can do the same thing too if you want to follow along on your own tabs. But sometimes it's gonna be showing on the screen. We won't have all tabs on the screen at the same time, obviously, but if you don't have to follow along because what we'll be talking about will be on the screen. But if you want to like compare the own translation yourself as I'm presenting, you can have those tabs yourself. So the instructions to find the one PDF file is Esther Nets Nets. Yeah, and it's the first link. So it's a free. They provide it free, nicely enough, even though it's in. I'm assuming copyright. Still, they allow it for free, so that's wonderful. So this is the PDF file there. That is one of the primary basis. You know how I saw this Book of Esther is special because it has 4 different versions we're working on. So one of those 4 versions is called the alpha text, and that I am using the Nets version for the alpha text. Then you have Old Latin English. So it is the academia link, that first link. So if you click that, I would actually download the PDF file, not view it on academia. So if you download it and then you open it as a tab, that will make it easier, because when you're viewing it in academia, it seems to be more delayed or slow when you are viewing it on their site. So, but yeah, so you can see the Old Latin translation of Esther. Now, what's interesting is Old Latin is actually very important for the Old Testament text of the Septuagint. The Old Latin is a translation of the Old Testament from the original Septuagint documents. Um, having this issue. I'm going to try to sign this issue.
Okay, so while Onieh is working on that, just going to make sure I got, so I got 3. Onieh was talking about 3 different books or 3 different PDFs, and I'm just going to open each one of them, or I'm going to open all of them on Adobe Acrobat. That way we have them all in one place. Let me just see here.
While you're doing that, so this keeps happening. So I'm going to actually come on my phone right now. And then what I'll probably do is just, I guess, do you know if I leave, because I paired it to my channel. Is it still going to be paired if I leave on the computer? I think
I
it
believe
will, right?
so.
Okay. If not, it's no big deal. Oops, hold on. I gotta leave. 1 second.
I got you here on the phone, on your phone, right here.
All right, yeah. So I had my mic on the one thing, so it was creating a reverberating or echoing effect. But so now the connection should be much better. We shouldn't be having these problems anymore. So I do apologize for this inconvenience. Like I said, it might be due to the new internet connection that we got from Spectrum, or it could just be the fact that my computer is running out of space, and maybe everything's slowed down because of that.
Running out of steam, like my grandmother used to say.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll show you what I got here, Onieh. So this is the link that you sent, or the PDF you sent me, and then we have the Nets version. I suppose, just to confirm, this is what you're talking about, Onieh.
Yes. Hold on a second. I'm going to open on YouTube the same page, but I need to mute it. So don't say anything yet, so I can mute it so that it doesn't have the echo. Okay, so it is muted. So it should be good. So you can talk all you want now, or we could,
Okay, so I just want to make sure I have the right stuff here set up. We have 3 different documents. I have the one that you sent me in the email and the PDF. Then there's the Nets version, which I hope this is the right one I have here. And then there's the old Latin version. Okay.
Yes. So can you also have open in 2 tabs, one the King James version and the other the Breton? Now we're not gonna go we're not gonna consult most of these other tabs much, but we are going to
So there's the Brenton, and let me see, King James. I'll just put this on King James. So there's your Esther King James, your Brenton, and then the other 3 documents, which is, I'm not sure what to call it. This would be your version of the Book of Esther. This is the Nets version and the Old Latin. So we have 5 different ones here.
yes. So we're not going to go through most of those tabs, but they're going to be there just in case we will look at some of those other tabs. The main one we're going to be looking through is the version that I sent you, that is the my version that I've prepared. It hasn't been 100% finished for part 2 of the process, but it's mostly finished, and I plan to finish the rest of it tonight and tomorrow, in preparation for tomorrow night for their conclusion. So with that said, I wanted to first explain the differences. It looks like we don't have that many people on, like we normally do. Maybe because of the connection issues. Does it show that there's a lot of people on from your end?
I had 12. It went down to 11 now. That's
Oh, so,
across the.
so oh, okay. It's still showing. All right. That's why, because I'm viewing on my channel. That's the confusing thing, because it's
Yeah.
paired to my channel. um, Hold on, let me see if I go to yours.
Just so people understand, we are broadcasting on multiple different channels. So when I say 12 or 11, this is across like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, VK, DLive, Twitch, all that kind of stuff, and also including Onieh's channel as well. Now it's back up to 12 now.
All right, so don't say anything for a second while I open this, just so that it limits the echo. Oh, it's already muted. Okay, so we're good. All right. So, so with that said, I want to first talk about I was going to say the differences between the Book of Esther, but before we get to the differences, what's a really interesting topic, if you look at the top, actually, it says Book of Esther, which sounds weird, right? Why did I say Esther? That sounds really dumb, right? Well, it is due to my belief of who Esther is in history. One of the common criticisms of the Book of Esther specifically is that it is not historically reliable, they say. The historicity of the book is doubted. But there's actually several interesting things that go to actually support the Book of Esther's historicity. So one of them is I don't know, Christopher, are you familiar with, not necessarily familiar with the actual text, but have you heard of the ancient Greek historian by the name of Herodotus?
Yes.
So he wrote on all kinds of different stuff. He is considered by many the father of history, for he wrote one of the earliest accounts of history that we have. And that book that he wrote contains things about the Persians. He actually wrote a lot about the Persians. And amongst his history of the Persians, let's see if we can actually find the exact text to quote for you guys. Because Christopher Enoch just went through the text with you on his channel. Let's see. So if you see the same phrase from his book, you'd be like, oh yeah, Book of Esther says that same phrase. Interesting. So let me just see that very specific phrase. Just demonstrating the historicity. Because one of the things, interestingly enough, the differences between the Septuagint and Masoretic text is who is the king. So the Masoretic version says it's Xerxes or Ahasuerus, which is the identical with Xerxes. The Septuagint identifies as Artaxerxes, which is a completely different person. So the Septuagint version is claiming that it's a totally different person from history. That's going to influence our attempts to ground the Book of Esther in historical events. So, let's see. If I can't find it, then I'll just base it off my memory because I'm pretty sure I remember what it said. Okay, this might be good. Basically, what I'm trying to find is I recall reading something about you know how Book of Esther says India to Ethiopia, basically saying the range of where Xerxes reigned.
Yeah.
Well, it says a very similar phrase in Herodotus, which suggests that he's talking about the same king. So that helps us identify that Xerxes is the correct translation and not Artaxerxes. Let's see. Uh, I will try to find it later tonight, I think. And then if I can find it, then I'll share it for tomorrow. So we'll move on from that.
So
Um,
the Septuagint says Artaxerxes, which is a completely different king than the Masoretic Xerxes.
Yeah, and also what complicates it is that there's more than one Artaxerxes and there's more than one Xerxes. But based on the history of the Bible and linking it with actual history, it narrows down who these individuals could be. So Xerxes or Artaxerxes are very specific individuals, but two individuals of who it could be. But Xerxes fits much more the historical identification. So now,
What about Ahasuerus? How does that name come into the play?
so it's basically a closer rendering of the Persian name. The Xerxes is a transliteration of that name. It's kind of comparable to the whole thing with Yeshua versus Jesus. How does Jesus come from Yeshua? Well, we know from history, the linguistics, that Jesus does come from it. It's just through a process of transmission over time. So it's a similar issue with Xerxes being derived from Ahasuerus or whatever the Persian. Actually, interestingly enough, apparently in the Persian, the initial A is not there. The A seems to be added by the Masoretic transliteration. So I want you to go to let's see, is this the article? I don't know if it's the article, but if you want to go to it, I think this is actually. So it's the Torah.com.
The Torah or just Torah.com?
Yeah, it's the Torah.com. And then what I'm going to have you do is in the search bar, you'll type Esther and then a different word, and the word is amestris, which is Amestris.
A-N or A-M?
A-M with
A-M, sorry.
E-S-T-R and then I-S.
Okay.
So that you'll click that link, that first one. So first, we were just talking about this, the Xerxes. So it actually says an explanation for the Xerxes. So the old Persian form of the name, if you go down a little bit, it says the linguistic connection between Xerxes and Akashverosh. So the old Persian form of the name is Kshayarsha. So then it just does a little explanation of the Greek, a little bit lower, explain the Greek, explains how it becomes an X, and then the ES, it tells you, that's just how the Greek endings work. It adds ES typically at the end of names, just like they give an example of Moses, or Jesus. Again, it's an S ending. If you remove the S endings, it's much closer to the Hebrew versions. Mm-hmm. So first of all, I want you guys to consider the name Amester. Look at how very similar the name is. In the name Amester, it has the letters ESTR in a row. That is highly similar. Now, according to history, there's one primary wife of Xerxes, and that's Amestris. There's no other individual. So there's no Vashti, there's no Esther, there's no, you would think that there would be record of his marriage to Esther, but there's not. Unless we've been looking in the wrong place the whole time, and it's right in front of our eyes, Amestris. So let's see here. Okay, so if you go back to that website that you were just on, and if you go down from Herodotus, the wife of Xerxes, it says so what it says is I have heard, it says, to bury alive is a Persian custom. I have heard that when Xerxes' wife Amestris attained to old age, she buried 14 sons of notable Persians as a thanks offering on her own behalf to the fabled god of the netherworld. And then it says, he tells a story depicting the cruelty of Amestris. The following is a brief outline of the story. Now, by the way, so some of this stuff is a criticism from the ancients of the Persians. The Greeks didn't like the Persians. So some of this is through the lens of criticizing a foreign ruler. But if you look past that bias, there are some striking similarities with the Esther that we're familiar with in the Book of Esther. So if we look here, it says, at Sardis, Xerxes fell in love with the wife of his brother Masistus. It says, the wife of Masistus rejects his advances. Xerxes then arranges a marriage between his son Darius and the daughter of Masistus, thinking that this would eventually help him seduce the mother. The story continues at Susa, with the exact time of the continuation unspecified. Let's see. When Amestris finds out, she takes revenge on the mother. She sends for the soldiers of the royal bodyguard and has the mother mutilated. Many of her body parts are ordered cut off and thrown to the dogs. When Masistus sees what was done to his wife, he decides to stir up a revolt against Xerxes. And then you go down a little bit lower. it says, according to CTCS, from him we learn Amestris outlives Xerxes and dies after she has grown very old. After years of pestering, Amestris is finally able to convince her son Artaxerxes to let her avenge the death of another son, Achaemenides. She is able to have 50 Greeks decapitated and their leader Inaros impaled in revenge for Inaros and his men having slain Achaemenides 5 years earlier. She is given the authority by Artaxerxes to punish a physician who deceived her daughter Amytis into having sexual relations with him. She orders him kept in chains and tortured for 2 months and eventually buried alive. The next one is a criticism of her, where it says she was frequently intimate with men and is depicted either as licentious or perhaps even as a nymphomaniac. She orders the murderer of her grandchild impaled. She's able to convince Artaxerxes to forgive Amytis' husband Megabyzus on various occasions. So on first glance, it sounds very different. Like, Esther's this sweet woman or whatever. But if you actually look in the Book of Esther closely, you see that she orchestrates the death of Persians, Haman, his entire family, and it says, I believe, I didn't check it recently, but I think it said 500 individuals were slaughtered by, like, Esther basically got permission to have 500 Persian officials slaughtered, and then she was able to get the Jews to have permission to slaughter those trying to kill them. So according to the Masoretic text, 75,000 people were killed. The Septuagint, interestingly enough, actually says it's only 15,000. But whether it's 15,000 or 75,000, this actually is a much more, that seems like to be a vengeful person. I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's a characteristic quality of she wants vengeance for her people. And throughout the Book of Esther, she gets requests. She goes to the king Xerxes and asks for permission for these things. When she's granted the permission, then she's ruthless. And so this says that the same thing happened after Xerxes died, with Artaxerxes becoming king. She would then ask him for justice for various offenses, such as for her daughter or the murder of her grandchild. And so, like I said, I don't know if this is the same exact article as what I was reading the other time, but it's from the same website, and it says most of the same basic information. So I'm convinced personally that Amestris is Esther. And because also, interestingly, Xerxes, in the documents that we have record of one of his officials being named Mordecai. That's actual record. Although his actual name was probably not Mordecai, but Mardukah. That's the version, a more original version of how it might be rendered, Mardukah. And it is in reference to the god Marduk. But yeah, so I believe that this is a basis for us to ground Book of Esther in history. Now, another thing that some people might take issue with for the Book of Esther, for it being scripture, is there's no mention of God at all. Nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with the name of God at all. So how is this a religious book? Well, interestingly enough, the Septuagint version has God all throughout, and not only that, it has Esther being a Torah keeper. So one of the problems of Esther being married to Xerxes is the fact that the Torah condemns marriage to Gentiles or pagans. For Jews. Jews are not allowed. That is a capital crime. You could see that, for example, in the book of Jubilees. Jubilees says that it is a death penalty offense if an Israelite is married to a unclean Gentile who is unholy, who does not follow the laws of holiness. And those main laws have to do with worshiping other gods and just living a very unholy life. Perhaps the Torah would give an exception to Gentiles who are worshiping the true God and not worshiping other gods, and they're living a pure life. They might perhaps they might make an exception for that, especially because it does seem to make an exception for males, like Joseph married an Egyptian woman, Asenath, and a bunch of people throughout history marry foreign women, like
Moses.
Moses. Even later, Boaz marries Ruth, who's a Moabite, and it says in the Torah, a Moabite is not to join the congregation for 10 generations. So there does seem to be some exception to allow Gentiles to become Israelites in a limited sense, or holy enough to be married to one. But in general, it's a capital offense. So the question is, was Esther even a believer? Did she even keep Torah? Did she care about righteousness at all, or was she just a Jew like modern Jews today who don't really care about righteousness or religion at all? Well, according to the Septuagint version, that's a very false characterization of her. She was keeping Torah the whole time. She's a great worshiper of God. She was righteous, but that still leaves the issue of the fact that she apparently was married to Xerxes. Now, for a while, I actually was resisting this idea, because what's interesting is the Septuagint, instead of saying that Esther is the daughter of Mordecai, it says that Esther is the wife of Mordecai. And the Talmud, even though the Masoretic text says the same thing, the daughter of Mordecai raised her as his daughter, it says. The Septuagint says he took her as his wife, not as his daughter. So Masoretic, he took her as his daughter. Septuagint, he took her as his wife. The Talmud is based on the Masoretic text, and yet it interprets it the way the Septuagint does. It says in the Talmud that Esther was the wife of Mordecai. So, if that was the case, if that's the correct reading, then either she was committing adultery, or she didn't actually have relations with Xerxes, and she wasn't actually doing anything like that. That's what I was originally thinking. But the more I studied it, like especially if a mistress is Xerxes, then obviously she did actually have relations with Xerxes and was married to him and not married to others. But also, I used to have a much higher opinion of the Septuagint. I still have a really high opinion of the Septuagint, don't get me wrong. But I used to think like Septuagint is like always right, except 10% of the time it's wrong, or I'm just making up random numbers, but you know what I mean. I thought Septuagint was like almost always right. But the more I studied textual criticism, comparing the differences, I've come to realize the Masoretic text is far more reliable than I have originally given credit for. So that's important, because that, if you're basing your version of the Bible on a false paradigm, that the Septuagint is almost always correct, then we're going to get some really bad readings. Unfortunately, the Septuagint has a lot of bad readings in many places. On the other hand, the Septuagint has a lot of really good readings that have been lost from the original text. So even for the bad readings, we should still know what they say and do a comparison we should see what the differences are. But so originally I thought, for the Book of Esther, Septuagint version, that's the one. Masoretic, ignore it for the most part. But after doing intense comparison of Book of Esther Masoretic version and the Septuagint version, what I can tell you is, well, first of all, I believe the reading of the daughter of Mordecai is the correct reading in that specific issue. But secondly, like a broader spectrum here, the best way to put it is, so you're going to hear like what's called, for people that talk about the Apocrypha, included in the Apocrypha is called the additions to Esther. And those are 6 chapters, long chapters, which are not found in the Masoretic text, but which are found in the Septuagint. And those are considered the primary additions. It is my perspective that those additions are authentic in one way or another. They're authentic. So the Masoretic text has removed those wrongly. But throughout the rest of the text, there are a lot of differences too. But the vast majority of these differences throughout the rest of the text, I believe the Masoretic text is the more correct version. So this is an oversimplification, but I would tell you guys for the Book of Esther to read the Masoretic version for the stuff that's not the extra chapters, and then for the extra chapters to look at the Septuagint version. And interestingly enough, the Latin Vulgate does that same thing. Jerome translated the Book of Esther. He translated the Hebrew text for all the other sections, but those 6 extra chapters he translated from the Septuagint, because obviously he couldn't translate from the Hebrew, because the Hebrew copies of Esther in his day did not have those extra chapters.
Why do you think that the Masoretic version left out those 6 chapters?
So for the longest time, I believed that, the Jews were afraid of keeping the Feast of Purim because, the Romans were in power, and the Romans did not want rebellion, right? Like, with Yeshua being on the scene, they wanted to make sure there was no rebellion at all. People were saying he's king, and if they heard anyone say that someone's king besides Caesar or Herod or whoever was king, I forget who's king at the time, but whoever's king, if someone else is claiming to be king, then they're going to shut that rebellion down as quick as possible, the Romans. So the Feast of Purim celebrates rebellion of the Jews against a foreign government that is ruling over them. The Persians were ruling over the Jews, and then the Jews basically rebel against Persia. So if Persians were openly celebrating the Feast of Purim amongst the Romans would get scared of that they were going to become radicalized and try to do the same thing for fighting back against Rome. That was my initial theory, and I believed that for years until very recently. I have come to the conclusion, and when I say very recently, I mean in the last few months, I've changed my mind on this. So here's the thing. On the one hand, it doesn't make sense why the Jews would take out all those pro-Torah God stuff. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't always happen in places where it's like glorifying rebellion. It just, in random places, God is in the Septuagint where it's not in the Masoretic, in like a single insertion in one verse. So it doesn't make sense that the Hebrew scribes would be like, oh no, we got to get rid of God. Let's get rid of God. Let's get rid of Torah. No, that's bad. The Jews wouldn't do that. It doesn't make sense. The more I think about it, it doesn't make sense. On the other hand, it also doesn't really seem to make sense that these scribes would be like, let's make up entire narratives that we have no basis for, but we're going to create an entire narrative, putting entire dialogues into their mouths that there's no basis for whatsoever. I don't think the ancients did that. Modern people sometimes try to do that. Like I'm going to be doing what's called a reconstructed Bible. And so I might do some of that type of stuff. But the ancient scribes did not do that type of thing. That wasn't a thing. So, um, so basically, I have now come to the conclusion that all the extra stuff derives from letters originally that were included in the Book of Esther. So there's 6 editions. Edition 1, or what's called edition A, and edition E, no wait, edition F. A and F both have to do with a dream that Mordecai had. Edition A is telling us that Mordecai had a dream. Edition E tells us that of the dream's fulfillment. But I want you right now, Christopher, if you could go to Brenton version and let's look at edition A briefly, because we're going to see it doesn't make sense. This isn't right. There should be something before this. Is there a if you press left at the top? No, huh, weird.
Oh, I see. Yeah, they only got the 10 chapters here.
Okay, that is weird. Go to chapter 3 for a second to see if they include the extra chapter. So if they include it, it'll be in the midst. Like if you keep scrolling down. No, they don't include them. They remove them for some reason in this whatever you're using, Bible Hub or something. That is really weird. So okay, then I mean, so you could you go to ebible.org. Oh, okay. You already got that in your history, it looks like.
Yeah. So
so you go to chapter 1.
they have the additions to Ezra here.
That's Ezra. Go to Esther.
Yeah.
You always get those confused.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I watched
Esther,
your thing the other day. You were getting it confused.
Yeah. Esther, do you want me to do the Greek or?
Well, you click that. I think they only have the Greek there. It says Greek, but it's just telling you it's the Greek version. So okay, so is that first page? Is that the chapter, or do you have to go to the next page?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you go to the top. It introduces Mordecai. I mean, when I say the top, I mean verse 1. Sorry. So it introduces Mordecai. Well, Mordecai is introduced later on. He's introduced in. Hold on a second. So you know what's really weird for me is eBible. I don't know if that's the website you're using at the moment, but it always, like, for the last couple days, it's been like not working for me. Like it'll work sometimes, then it'll stop working. But anyway, so it introduces Mordecai, but Mordecai is introduced later on in the book, even in the Septuagint version. He's introduced. Let's see. He's introduced in chapter 2, I believe. Let's check it for a second here. Yeah, if you go to chapter 2 briefly, you'll look and you'll see verse 5. Chapter 2, verse 5. There was a Jew in the city Susa, and his name was Mordecai. So see, he had been brought a prisoner from Jerusalem, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried into captivity. So if you go back the previous page, what we were just on, and now look at that text where it says Mordecai, and then it's giving his introduction. He was of the captivity, and then if you go down to the end of the dream, it says Mordecai rested quiet in the palace with Gabbatha and Thara, the king's two chamberlains, eunuchs who guarded the palace. And he heard their reasoning and searched out their plans, and learned that they were preparing to lay hands on King Artaxerxes. And he informed the king concerning them. And the king examined the two chamberlains, and they confessed and were executed. And the king wrote these things for a memorial. Also Mordecai wrote concerning these matters. And the king commanded Mordecai to attend in the palace, and gave gifts for this service. And Haman the son of Ammedatha, the Bugian, was honorable in the sight of the king, and he endeavored to hurt Mordecai and his people. I don't know why it says I'm using a different website that has something weird at the end here. Oh, that's why, because it's badly formatted. It says Bika. It cuts off. Okay, so because of the king's two chamberlains. Okay. But yeah, so then it goes on and says, it came to pass after these things, so then it starts going, and it starts over the story, and then you go to chapter 2, and it redoes the whole story that was just said in this beginning chapter. So this very much seems to be an insertion, this dream. So did they just make up this dream? It doesn't make sense that a scribe would just like make up a dream out of thin air, because it's a very specific dream. So I believe the dream is authentic, but it was not in the beginning. The dream was part of a letter that once existed, which no longer exists. But the scribe who's responsible for the Septuagint version extracted the dream from that letter and put it at the beginning of the book, and then gave an intro, because Mordecai is introduced later, but the dream occurs prior to the events of the story. So it creates a confusing chronology where you're trying to talk about a dream someone had, but you don't know who it is, so you have to introduce him. So the scribe put the dream in the beginning of the story, and then had to introduce Mordecai to explain who it was that was having the dream. So that is my explanation for why it seems weird in the beginning. The fulfillment of the dream is at the end of the book. Then we have two letters in chapter 3, and also interestingly, both the Masoretic text tells us that these letters were written, but it doesn't tell us what those letters say. So if you want, you can go to King James Version, chapter 3. Let's see. Verses 12 to 14. So then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, and to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province, according to the writing thereof, and every people after their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus was it written, and sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by post into all the king's provinces, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, upon the 13th of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and the spoil of them for a prey. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. So there's a letter there, but where is it? The Septuagint has that letter. What's purported to be the letter. The fact that the Masoretic text tells us a letter existed. So if a letter existed, then there's reason to believe it could have been out there in the ancient world, right? Someone might have had access to that book. So why do we have to assume? Why do the scholars assume that that letter was made up? Couldn't it be that that letter was authentic and was still known to exist at that time, and the scribe behind it simply included that letter? Because if we are believers of the Bible, so that's what the Bible says, that there was a letter. So we know that there had to be a letter. So where is it? The letter is gone. Well, the Septuagint version claims to preserve that letter, and that's the best that we have. And I think we can be confident that that letter is authentic. But if it's not like we believe heresy. You know, it's just a claim to be what the letter was, a description basically of Haman ordering the Jews to be killed. And then there's another letter, which is in chapter 8. So if you go to chapter 8, now I almost finished this today, but the few remaining verses I didn't get done of the letter. But the chapter, well, first we'll go to verse 5, where it says, Esther's talking, if it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews, which are in all the king's provinces. So again, it's a reference to that letter that the Septuagint does have. So you go to verse 10, it says, and he wrote in the king, Mordecai, he wrote in King Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by post on horseback, riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries. And then it says, wherein, it tells us what was in the letter, wherein the king granted the Jews, which were in every city, to gather themselves together and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, little ones and women, and the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, upon the 13th of the 12th month, which is the month Adar. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So where's that letter? Well, the Septuagint has that letter. What claims to be that letter? Again, the Masoretic text says that when letter was written, we don't have a copy of it in Masoretic, but we have to believe that that letter existed. So if that existed, then it is reasonable to believe that someone had access to it and included it. And why should we doubt that it's an authentic letter when Book of Esther tells us that such letter did in fact exist? So those two letters are additions, and you could see why they'd be removed, because they're unnecessary to the book to give the basic story. Because the letters are summarized in the Masoretic text, what it says. So do you really need a lengthy thing of Haman saying, kill them, kill the Jews, I command you to kill the Jews, blah, 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 blah. Do you need that? You don't need it for the story. And so there is some evidence that scribes removed things that they found repetitive or redundant. There is evidence of that. I see evidence much of the time that redundancy scribes didn't like, and they removed it. On the other hand, scribes also didn't like ambiguity, and so they often inserted text to make it clearer, but when they inserted text to make it clearer, they often made it redundant. So there's a bit of a confusion where sometimes they remove stuff because they don't like redundancy, but they will add extra redundancy if they believe the text is ambiguous and needs clarification to be interpreted the way they believe it should be interpreted. So let's see here. The other additions are there's the prayer of Mordecai, and there's the prayer of Esther. Now, there's an allusion to that in Masoretic text, but it doesn't say they prayed; it just says they fasted. But if you look at the Septuagint, it has a long, lengthy prayer of Mordecai and a long, lengthy prayer of Esther. And in Esther's prayer, she goes on saying she did not. She eats kosher. She says she and she abhors the bed of the uncircumcised. Well, that makes it sound like she doesn't want to sleep with Xerxes. So the question is, if she's claiming to be righteous, did she actually sleep with Xerxes? Well, later on in the book of Esther, it says that after what Esther had done, a bunch of the Persians became circumcised, it says. Let me see, where was that? Or it says they became Jews. I don't know if it says. The Septuagint, I think, says became circumcised. Let's see. I'll give you the exact verse. Okay, it's verse 17 of chapter 8 of the Masoretic text. And it says, many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Now, the Septuagint, I believe, let me just double check this. 8:17. Yeah, you go to 8:17. It says, and many of the Gentiles were circumcised and became Jews for fear of the Jews. Very bottom, verse 17. So, it is plausible. We don't have absolute confirmation, but it is plausible that all the other virgins, when they came in, they slept with the king. But when she came in, just imagine, just think like a worldly person for a second, okay? Many of us have been worldly in our past. I was always raised a Christian, but I know some people have had, came to the faith and they used to be a worldly person. So just think from a worldly perspective for a second. Someone is playing hard to get and they're like, no, I'm not going to do this. Sometimes that increases your attraction to them, like you really want to be with them because, they're making you chase after them. So now imagine this, all these women willingly give themselves to the king. Esther, however, she comes into the king, she stays the night, but she does not sleep with him. And, she is good in conversation. She looks beautiful, but he says, no, not until later. I'm not ready yet. So she's like giving him something to chase after. He might not have said, how dare you? He might have been, that might have made her more desirous in his eyes. And so she may have been biding her time, not yet sleeping with the king, because it doesn't say like in the book of Esther, it doesn't say she became his queen and they were together for years. It says she became the queen and then soon after all this happened. So there wasn't a lot of time and he had plenty of other women to sleep with, so if he had urges that he won, and she didn't want to do anything, he could have easily just took one of the concubines. So, so Esther, it is plausible that she waited until this time and then he became circumcised. And once he became circumcised, then she slept with him and had kids, just like history says, a mistress had kids. On the other hand, it is also possible that Esther broke the law because we don't want to assume necessarily that it's impossible for someone in the Bible to not fully keep the law. Samson, through Samson, the Philistines were saved. The Israelites were saved from the Philistines. But what does it say about Samson? He broke the Nazirite laws. He tried to take pagan women as his wives. He went to see prostitutes. So Samson did not seem to be particularly righteous in this way. So it is possible that Esther was mostly righteous, but that she was weak in this thing where she gave in and slept with the king and was his wife. Because we know in our own lives as well as other people that we may not have perfectly kept the Torah ourselves. So it is a distinct possibility that Esther just did not keep the Torah correctly in her being with Xerxes. But if we're going to give her the benefit of the doubt, I think it is plausible that the king could have become circumcised. And if that's the case, then it wouldn't have been wrong for Esther to remain with the king. Of course, that's speculation, but the speculation is supported potentially by the text of the Masoretic and Septuagint, which says that many of the Persians did convert. And so let's see here. The other, what's called the edition, is a much longer version of Esther coming into the king's presence, and asking him to, when she says in chapter 5, when she's like, "Come, I want to invite you to a banquet. Come tomorrow, you and Haman," or so. That whole thing is like a few verses, but in the Septuagint, it's like a much longer thing, and that's called its own chapter, its own edition. But that's actually why the top of your Septuagint, or Septuagint one you're looking at, that it says 5 chapters instead of 6, because I said it was 6 extra chapters, but the website you had shown said 5, but that's because the one chapter is actually not an extra chapter. It's like part of chapter 5. It's just longer verses, but way longer, almost to the extent of a full chapter. So how do we explain this? Why are there these differences between the two versions? Did some scribe was like, "Oh, God needs to be in this part. Oh yeah, God gotta be right there." Or was there originally God in there and then he was taken out? Or was there a third option? I present to you the third option. Originally, the Book of Esther had tons of letters. A few of the letters were kept in, and then the other letters were either ignored entirely or they were extracted from. They took extraction. So I will point you to another letter that the Masoretic tells us about, which the Septuagint does not have, and I believe once existed in the Book of Esther, but was removed by the scribes for seeming irrelevant. And I think that's chapter 1. Let's see here. Yeah, so if you go to the beginning, verses 19 to 22 of chapter 1, it says, "If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And when the king's decree which he shall make shall be published throughout all his empire, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and small. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. And he sent letters into all the king's provinces, into every province, according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people." So what happened to that letter? Well, maybe it was never included. But if we are to believe these other letters were originally included, as the Septuagint suggests, then there's reason to believe that this letter that we're being told about was also originally included. But imagine a letter of Xerxes being included, which just says, make sure your wives don't disrespect their husbands, blah blah blah. Well, this is a letter from a pagan king who's telling people to how to be married. So some people might have thought, well, that's not authoritative because it's from the king, the king's opinion. So why include the king's opinion? Isn't it enough just to say, okay, he wrote a letter to these people telling them that husbands should be respected by their wives? So I believe originally there was a full-length letter which gave Xerxes' justification for divorcing Vashti and his command for the people to make sure that their wives are submissive to their husbands. Again, that wouldn't be necessarily authoritative. Some people some believers believe in woman equality with men, although I don't see how that you can really support that from the Torah. But they believe that the idea that women are to be submissive to their husbands is in violation of rights of women. So for those that believe that, they could see this letter from the king. You don't have to see this letter of the king saying women are to submit to their husbands and say, that's scripture, so I have to accept it. Because we've talked about this before. Just because it's in scripture doesn't mean it's the word of God or commanded by God. So it could be a faithful recording of a false teaching that was spoken by that individual. So we don't have to necessarily dismiss a text just because it might contain falsehoods in it. If it's faithfully recording that falsehood that was spoken by that individual. So I say that even if it's not necessarily the word of God, it should be included. I think it was removed by scribes because they thought it was unnecessary. And then you got, let's see here. Okay, go to chapter 9 of Esther. So Mordecai wrote these things. Verse 20. Mordecai, I guess we'll go back before to verse 20. Okay. So it talks about the day, the Jews that were at Shushan, verse 17. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day of the same rested day, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews at Shushan assembled together on the 13th thereof, and on the 14th thereof, and on the 15th of the same they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month Adar gladness and feasting, and a good day, and of sending portions one to another. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Xerxes, nigh and far, to establish among them that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day of the same yearly, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, and that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them. Let's see. We're skipping. Well, I'll just read it. So verse 24, because Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur, that is, the lot, to consume them and to destroy them. But when she came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked device, which he devised against the Jews, should return upon his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore they called these days Purim after the name of Pur. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, and which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto them, the Jews ordained and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves unto them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing, and according to their time every year. And these days are to be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city. And these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. And Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. And he sent the letters unto all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim in their times, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fastings and their cry. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. So what's the second letter of Purim? Well, strangely, the Septuagint does not have an extra letter in this case. So if we are to believe what the scholars say, that some random person was like, let's invent letters to fill in these places, why didn't they invent letters for this? This is a very significant one. Why didn't they invent that letter? What's more probable is that the letter originally existed and was removed for being redundant. Because these last few verses we just read is a lengthy summary of what was written in that letter. So imagine having a lengthy summary and then giving that entire letter over again. It seems redundant. So you either remove the summary or you remove the letter to remove the redundancy. So the Masoretic text has a tendency to remove the letters anyway. We have observed. We observe that they remove all the letters. So I believe the original framework of the story of Esther was, remember, Esther's identity was hidden. I don't think it's coincidence. Her identity was hidden. So her religiosity was also hidden. Her worship of God, her Torah, her Jewishness was hidden. So I think that's a narrative style that the Masoretic text correctly preserves, that it tells the story of Esther with her identity concealed throughout the entire thing. And then at the end of the story, her true identity is revealed, and then they reveal how God was with them the entire time. So I believe, this letter that it talks about in chapter 9 that we don't have anymore, I believe that letter was basically a rehash of almost the entire book of Esther in a shorter form, where basically they retold the events, where Mordecai starts off and says these things were basically telling the Jews how God was in these things. So because it says that they wrote letters to command the Jews to keep these days as holy times. So there's a lot of people today who think Esther is not scripture because it has, or it's not authoritative because it has extra commands not in Torah. Keep Purim, and that is an issue for some people. So, Mordecai and Esther want people to keep this feast, so they have to explain why this festival should be kept. So they have to show how God was in it the whole time. So they start off in the letter that I believe once existed. This is my speculation, but I believe there's a very good reason to think that this letter did exist and was originally part of the Book of Esther. So the letter would start off with Mordecai explaining how he had a dream that foretold these events. And then talking about what happened with, he would review how he saved the king's life. And then they would review how Haman tried to kill them. And then they would go into how Mordecai did his prayer. So that's where the prayer comes from. The prayer would come from the missing letter, Mordecai's prayer. And then they go on to say how Esther's prayer, Esther gives her prayer. So then Esther's prayer is included in that letter. And then after that, then it goes into remember how I said in chapter 5, when Esther comes into the king, it's a much longer version? Well, in that much longer version, God is mentioned in it, like excessively. So I believe that excessive stuff was not originally part of that verse. Instead, that's from the fuller version of this lost letter, where in going through that story, Esther talks about how she went into the king and was greatly afraid, but God gave her strength in that moment. And then talking about how they got revenge against Haman, and they had victory over they got justice, basically. So that would be what the letter said, and then this is why you should keep Purim as a holy day. So imagine if that letter existed. That's summarizing the entire book of Esther. You can see why scribes did not have computers typing. They had to write out everything by hand. So if you want to make many, many, many copies, thousands of copies for people to read, it's tempting to take shortcuts and just remove things that are redundant as unnecessary. So literally rewriting the entire story, a summarized account of the entire story, it's like making the Book of Esther twice as long when you're you're just giving the same details a second time and then adding God here and there. So I believe the Masoretic scribes simply said, get rid of those letters. We don't need the letters. Stories preserved intact, basically. And we know God was behind these events. We can read between the lines and see that God was, the implication is there. We don't need it to be spelled out to us. And it's just too time consuming for scribes to write it out. That's my theory. And then the Septuagint scribes did not want to lose all these letters, but they didn't include all the letters. They're like, okay, that letter summarizing the entire book of Esther is a really long letter. Way too long. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the most important parts out that we really like, and that if we don't have would be a severe loss, such as and then at the end of the letter would be the fulfillment of the dream, the explanation of how the dream was fulfilled. So the Septuagint scribes be like, okay, first of all, we really love this dream. This dream, we cannot lose the account of this dream. So let's extract the dream from this lost letter. At the time, it wasn't lost because they still had access to it, but they didn't want to copy the entire letter in their copies. So they said, okay, we're going to extract the dream. We're going to extract the prayers, because those are great prayers, and the letters from Haman, the letters in chapter 3 and chapter 8 that we talked about, the letters of Haman to kill the Jews, and the letter of Esther to defend the Jews. Those are historically significant letters if they're valid letters. It gives the historical background. So those are great letters. Let's include those. But that letter about wives needing to submit to their husbands, okay, we don't care about that letter. That's not a big deal. We can remove that. We don't need to include that letter. That's fine. And the entire letter of the rehashing the entire story, we don't need that. Oh, but that one story about how Esther was like, when she came into the king and was like really scared, that is just really moving details. We don't want to lose that either. So let's extract that and put that in. So I think that's what they did. I think they took from that final super long letter, they took the best parts that they liked and then got rid of the letter. And they put the things in their chronological places. And that's why the Masoretic seems to, it doesn't have God at all, because the Septuagint seems to insert God in a way that seems intrusive. The way God is put in compared to the Masoretic, it's so systematic that it seems intrusive. Because, like we said, it doesn't make sense for the scribes to remove it, remove the reference to God from those verses. So it must have been added into those passages. but it also doesn't seem to make sense that they would just be invented out of thin air. So they had to be added from a source. And I suggest that source is that lost book, that lost letter that was included. What's your thoughts on that? Does that sound plausible, or what do you think on that?
Yeah, it sounds plausible. Yeah.
So, in my version of Esther, I'm actually going to try to reconstruct those letters, but I'm going to do what's italics for parts that I have reconstructed. So, italicize, when you see it in translations, you know that that's not actually part of a text. That was added typically.
It reminds
So
me of what the scholars say in the New Testament. The Gospels is the Q source. That's kind of reminds me of what you're
yeah,
saying.
exactly. And some scholars have the documentary hypothesis for the Torah. So there's different sources or whatever. But yeah. So I'm gonna actually try to reconstruct those. I'm even gonna try to reconstruct that letter to for a woman to submit to their husbands. But it's gonna be that letter will be entirely italicized because it's not preserved at all. But the letter for uh, the letter for that second letter of Purim in chapter 9 that was referred to, I'm going to basically summarize the entire story of Esther in italics, but in the specific places, like the dream, when I have the dream, it's not going to be in italics because I'm going to be verbatim reproducing the text. Except instead of the dream being at the beginning, I'm going to take it away from the beginning. It's not going to be in the beginning. So I believe it was added to the beginning. It should not be there. It'll be part of chapter 9 in my version. And the final fulfillment of the dream will also be in chapter 9 in that same letter and not at the end of the book where it is in the Septuagint. Same thing for the prayers of Mordecai and Esther. I don't believe they were in their places originally where they are. I think they were added in those places. I'm going to take those verbatim prayers and put them in this reconstructed letter of chapter 9. They won't be in italics either because I'm using actual text to put it there. And from chapter 5, when I reconstruct that part of the story, I will quote verbatim those sections, so it's not going to be in italics either. But the rest of the book will be in the rest of the letter being reconstructed in chapter 9 will be in italics. So that's the controversial thing about my Bible project is I call it the reconstructed Bible because I will be going for each book and reconstructing it, including inventing readings that don't exist in any manuscript. When I say inventing, I mean using evidence that those readings existed, but not having actual manuscript evidence. But there are reasons to believe that those readings existed, and so using my basis for those conclusions, I reconstruct those readings.
Like the
Scholars
Q
do
source.
reconstruction. Yeah, like the Q source. So scholars do reconstructions like that, but they don't do it to the extent I'm going to try to do it. So that's a controversial aspect of my Bible project. But I'm going to make it clear for you guys so you know, okay, this part was added. This was reconstructed. So if I don't agree with this reconstruction, it's from Onieh anyway, so it doesn't mean that it's correct. I'm doing this to give you guys an idea what the original text very likely said. It's not an exact reproduction, but it's to give you the basic gist of what the original text probably said in those places. And sometimes there will be extra sources that have some of that information that I'll be using to reconstruct it. Like, for example, Josephus says some interesting details that are not in our copies and not even in the Septuagint. When Josephus is going through the story, there's two details I want to tell you guys off the top of my head. One is actually I could just have you go to Josephus. Why don't you go to Josephus? So the Esther section in the Antiquities. So here's the question. Some people say, wow, Xerxes took every maiden in every virgin in all the provinces. That's a lot of women. So he had like thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of women. Well, actually, first of all, it says he only took the beautiful ones, so that was probably much smaller. But it also says so it doesn't tell us how many, right? Josephus somehow, for some reason, he claims there's a number. So if you go to Antiquities 11, if you want to just search 400. 400
Numbers or words?
words. 400 girls, I think.
400 of silver, 462, 462 myriads, 435, 400 lambs. Oh, this is it right here.
Yeah. So, okay. So, and this was used for 6 months by the virgins who were in number 400. So where did he get this? It doesn't seem like Josephus is not the guy to make things up out of thin air. He had sources. Did he base the 400 number off of the Book of Esther, or did he base it off of a like a historical source saying that Xerxes had 400 concubines or whatever? Did he have an extra biblical source in that sense? I'm inclined to think that he had a different version of Esther. That maybe in this lost book of this lost letter in chapter 9, it talked about 400 of them. So there's one other thing in this Josephus thing where it's extra stuff, not in any manuscript of Book of Esther. So that is, if you want to search in that same page, Theo.
THEO?
Yeah, does it show anything or no?
Nope.
All right, search BAG. Keep going down. How many BAGs are there? Is there a lot?
6.
All right, keep going down.
It's all the same name.
Oh, it might be spelled differently then. Okay, so then go to try Barn, BARN.
A second here.
And you're on the same one, right? The same page of Esther.
You're talking the Antiquities of the Jews?
11.
11?
Yeah.
So BA, you want me to search, what was that again?
BARN.
1.
There it is. Okay. Sometime after this, Bigthan and Teresh plotted against the king, and Barnabazus, the servant of one of the eunuchs, being by birth a Jew, was acquainted with their conspiracy, and discovered it to the queen's uncle. And Mordecai, by the means of Esther, made the conspirators known to the king. So in this thing, there's a whole nother individual that's not mentioned in any manuscript of the Book of Esther. So Josephus says that some random guy named Barnabas, that might be the same name as, like, in the New Testament, Barnabas. Mm-hmm. He was a servant of one of the chamberlains, or they say eunuchs, but eunuch is a bad translation in my opinion. So Barnabas was a servant. He was a Jew and he was a servant. So he overheard the conspiracy being talked about. So he went to Mordecai because he knew Mordecai was a Jew and he trusted Mordecai. So he went over to Mordecai and told him about it. So Mordecai didn't hear it. Like, Masoretic text and the Septuagint makes it sound like Mordecai heard it. Josephus had a text which said some random guy named Barnabas was the one who heard it and then told Mordecai about it. So it doesn't make sense for Josephus to be like, you know what? Let's make up a. It's not enough for Mordecai to hear this. Let's invent a guy. Let's see here. How about a servant did this? Let's see. What would the name be? Barnabas. I like that name. Hey, let's do that. Barnabas. Okay, there we go. Doesn't make sense, right? So he must have had a version of Esther that had this statement. And it could be that the verse in chapter 2, whatever it is, chapter 2, I think, the verse, it was removed from that verse. Or maybe Josephus had access to that letter and didn't quote the entire letter, obviously, but he included some extra details from that chapter 9 letter that are not preserved elsewhere in any manuscript. So because Josephus had access, we know from evidence of like Dead Sea Scrolls, he sometimes had access to things that no other manuscript has preserved. Like the Book of Samuel has readings in the Dead Sea Scrolls that are not preserved in any other manuscript, and a lot of those readings have support elsewhere only in Josephus. So shockingly, this seems to be evidence of some extra text originally part of Esther. But anyways, so this is kind of like, I know we're just so far this is just me introducing the differences. But
I see a question in the live chat. We're talking about manuscripts that are very, like, quite vastly. Jamie asked a question: what about things like equidistant letter messages? Or I believe, what that would.
So for that, I reject that flat out. I don't accept those. I don't believe in those. I don't accept them as authentic because they're based on the assumption that the Masoretic text is the original text. And there's just too much evidence that it's not in so many places. If you even have one letter difference, it's going to throw off the formula. And there's many places where there are differences. Even in manuscripts of Masoretic text, there's differences sometimes. Not as much. Actually, the manuscripts of Masoretic are much more uniform. But there are differences occasionally. And the Dead Sea Scrolls shows that the Masoretic text is often not the original text for certain books. So, and just imagine, some people believe Moses wrote the Torah, the 5 books, Genesis through Deuteronomy. I don't personally believe he wrote everything in those books. I think he wrote, if I were to give a guess, I would say he wrote like anywhere from a third to I would say a third. Yeah. I was going to say a third to a fifth of it, but just to be safe, I'll say a third he wrote. And then the rest was written by other scribes forming the narrative, but not inventing things, but they're using earlier sources. Like they're using books that Moses wrote, using books that the patriarchs wrote. Like, I don't believe Moses wrote Genesis at all. A lot of people do, but I don't. And then, I believe Moses wrote an account of his own life, which was the basis of using to form the narrative of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But then the laws that we have in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, those were written by Moses. I definitely believe that, 100%. So anything that's laws, anything that's being quoted in the mouth of Moses, I believe Moses wrote that somewhere. But anything that's narrating about what Moses did, I don't believe Moses wrote that. Or narrating about something, I don't believe Moses wrote that. He might have wrote something very similar, but he used different words, and he did not write those books that we know of. Let's see. Why did I even say that? What was the question that was asked? Sorry.
Just the question was, what about the things like equidistant letter messages?
Yeah, so what my point was for the mentioning about the Torah was the fact that if we give you the benefit of the doubt that the Torah, yes, it was written by Moses. Well, you're talking 1400 BC. So you're saying that the earliest copy that we have of the Hebrew text, which the equidistant thing, is based on the Masoretic text. So any conclusions of equidistant stuff is coming from Masoretic text. The earliest Masoretic text we have, 900 AD, or maybe 800-ish. Okay, so let's just say 800, just to give them more room. Okay, so 1400 BC, that's 1400 years, plus 800 years. You're talking over 2,000 years from the time Moses wrote it to the time of the earliest copy we have, and not a single difference occurred. They perfectly copied it, every copy throughout time. That's hard to believe, and there's no evidence to support it. In all evidence we have to the contrary is that there were many different manuscript versions, and there was no reason to assume the Masoretic text was the original text more than some of the others. That's not to say the Masoretic text is unreliable. It's just it's not the original perfect text. And there is clear evidence in many books of corruptions of readings. Sometimes there's books that quote the same exact phrase in one or the other. You talked about this, Christopher, when you were going through some of the comparisons of like Chronicles and Kings and things like that, where it's the same exact verse but different reading. So you'll see this in the New Testament, in the Gospels. Same narrative, but differences, variants, contradictions. So there are contradictions in the readings between the same stories of the Old Testament books, in like for Chronicles versus Kings or Chronicles versus Samuel. So in order for the equidistant thing to be correct, one of those would have to be wrong. They can't both be right, unless you're saying that for some reason God decided to do an equidistant thing with a false text, but it doesn't make sense. So my explanation for that is just that people see what they want to see. They read into things. It's basically like trying to find a formula to support something that you want it said already. So you're saying, I want to find this phrase. So then you're looking to see how to make that phrase. And then eventually you'll find a formula that enables you to make that phrase using a certain equidistant thing. So I don't buy into that at all. There
might be some people that are listening that don't know what this is. This is it's basically taking one letter every X number of letters and putting it all together and making a sentence or a word out of it. Let's say one every 11th Hebrew letter in
every
the Masoretic text.
Letter.
Every 100th.
Every 100th letter you put into a sentence and make it into a word or a sentence.
Every 250th letter.
Right, randomly, So it's based on the Masoretic text being the original text, and I don't buy into it.
I used to believe that, but the more I studied myself and the more I realized that the Masoretic text is not perfect, the more I realized that it's, that kind of thing, it doesn't hold water. And I have heard the criticisms of the equidistant letter sequence, and that is that you can do the same thing with a lot of other books. You can take a lot of other books and feed them through a computer and search through random number of equidistant letter sequences and put together, different historical events and say, oh, look at this. It predicted, the fall of, USSR or some crazy thing. So, I agree with Onieh on that.
And interestingly, like if you tell yourself to focus on a number, you say, I really like that number. You're going to start noticing that number everywhere. It's going to be like, whoa, that number, there it is again. For me, it's 607. I see that number everywhere. And when I see it, I'm like, there it is again. That's amazing. But then I remind myself, actually, it's just your brain is like highlighting, it's emphasizing that this is important. So pay extra special attention. So if you see it anywhere, be like, oh, mark it as important.
It's
That's
like
just
it's like buying a new vehicle. It's like you never saw that vehicle around before, then all of a sudden you see it everywhere.
yeah. Now, I do believe though, some stuff happens way too much for it to be like coincidence, in my opinion. So there'll be times where you learn a new word and you start hearing that word all the time in the first like couple weeks after, but then you don't hear it anymore. So so a lot of people just dismiss that as saying that it's just just those words are being used. You just never were aware of it before. But I don't personally believe that because it's happened too many times. So so I actually think that maybe there's something else going on where like there's some type of subconscious thing which is encouraging other people to use those words around you or something. I don't know. But or you're being attracted unbeknownst to you to sources that'll use that word because it's happened too many times for me. And I it happens with words where it'd be like, I'm pretty sure I would have remembered that word being used. It's different like when you're a kid. I'm sure when we were kids, we heard words all the time that we didn't realize were words. But like as an adult, I'm like, oh, I didn't hear that word before, and now I'm hearing it all the time. Wouldn't I have? I said, oh, I didn't hear that word before. Wouldn't I have? Oh, I didn't hear that word before, like last month or the month before. Why did I? If I was hearing it all the time, why am I only now deciding to hear it? And now, so to me, I think there might be something deeper for some of these things, but there is that phenomenon of you are telling yourself something, and then now you're seeing it. So I think that's probably the explanation for the equidistant thing, and it's associated with the phrase "the Bible code." You'll hear sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. And they never use that to predict the future. It's always looking back in the past. It's always trying to find. It's like it's almost like if you want to, if you if you spend enough time and effort in trying to find something, you'll find it no matter what.
Yep. So with that said, I will say for the Purim, I think that so I personally believe the Jews, anyone who is a real Jew, is supposed to keep it because according to the Torah, for example, it says, if a prophet commands you to do something, you shall listen and observe it. And interestingly, in the book of Jeremiah, I believe it's Jeremiah, he like commends the Rechabites for following the commands of their father that was handed down to them. Where basically he was saying you did a righteous thing to obey what your father commanded you to do. So that suggests that some commands can be given to certain groups, new commands by certain individuals. And so in this story, you have Mordecai and Esther, and doing it as a command, and then it says the Jews took it upon themselves to bind it on them and their children to keep this as a festival. Now you could get into the possibility of only the Jews, not the Israelites, because there's the two kingdoms, the 10 tribes are not part of the Jews, so maybe it's not for all of Israel, but it's just for the Jews. Or you could say maybe it's not even for all the Jews. Maybe it was only for the Persian Jews and whoever was descended from those Jews. But now we don't know who was descended from those Jews, so now it's not clear which Jews are to keep it and which Jews aren't. But in my view, it seems to be that they wrote a command to all the Jews that this is to be observed going forward, and it fits with the theme of holy times in the Book of Jubilees. Because in the Book of Jubilees, the way it worked is different patriarchs would do something, and when they did something, that made the day holy. So that made it so they had to start observing it as a holy day. So Abraham chose of his own volition. He's like, you know what? I'm going to dwell in booths here. And then after that happened, an angel came down and basically was like, from now on, you are to keep this feast, in as a memorial of the covenant that I'm making with you. So the Feast of Tabernacles was actually invented by Abraham. It wasn't. It didn't eventually. It didn't originally just be like God saying, "All right, do it." Why do I want it? Just because I want you to do it. The reason is because Abraham did it, and it's to honor the covenant. Same thing with the Shavuot. That's honoring the covenant that Noah made with God. And so in each of these, holy times of the Torah, it actually was first kept by a patriarch, according to the Book of Jubilees, just deciding to keep it. And then it became a holy day after, in honor of what they did, the special covenant thing they did to honor their agreement with God.
Could it be that these different holy days were celebrated all based upon the quote unquote Torah idea of remembering what God did for you, like remembering, there's a lot of that spoken of in the Torah.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea to consider. You have the thing where, because of the Passover thing, you were supposed to write it on your doorposts and write it on your arms and forehead, bind it to you, a written memorial of what happened. And the Passover thing. Why do we keep Passover? Why is Passover supposed to be kept? Well, this event happened. God saved them. Therefore, because God saved them, now you are to keep it as a holy day forever. So some people say, well, the Torah does not have the Book of Esther holiday, so therefore it's not to be kept. Because we only need to keep the holy days mentioned in the Torah. But that goes along the idea that no new commandments can be added. But it's not, the Torah doesn't say no new commandments can be added. It's just that the commandments, any new commandments cannot go against what has already been commanded. So there was never a command that said, these are all the holy days that will ever exist. It was said, these are the holy days that currently exist. And these holy days that currently exist are a forever thing as a covenant. But it doesn't say that new holy days can be added. And what's interesting is, Passover, for people who missed the Passover, they're like, oh, we missed the Passover. And God's like, okay, you know what? Because you missed Passover, I'm going to make second Passover. So now, if you missed Passover, you can meet up through it. You can make amends and fulfill the requirements of the law by keeping second Passover. But that just brings the question, well, wait a minute. If there's if there's a second Passover, then what about all the other holy days? Why isn't there a second Shavuot? There is. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's a second Shavuot and a third Shavuot. In the law of Moses itself, 3 Shavuot periods. So if you miss the first Shavuot, then you can come to the second Shavuot and give the first fruits that you missed at the first one.
It reminds me of Hanukkah as well. The same kind of argument. But again, in the way I see it is in the Torah, we have the principle, I guess you might call it a commandment, depends on how you look at it, or a principle that, to celebrate as a form of remembering what God did.
Yeah. Well, remember the Sabbath day. Why? And it tells you why. Because of what God did. But for tabernacles, according to the Book of Maccabees, the second Feast of Tabernacles, basically, is what they refer to it as, was first kept by Solomon when he dedicated the temple. He did a second Tabernacles. If I'm interpreting that correctly, that's what Second Maccabees seems to say. And then it says the same thing that Nehemiah seems to have kept a second Tabernacles. Again, that's what it seems to say, but You could read it yourself in Second Maccabees and see if you're getting the same vibe, same interpretation that I get when I read that. And then it says, of course, the Maccabees themselves, they got their salvation on those days, and so they simply codified what was already being observed as the second tabernacles and made it into a mandatory thing. Or now instead of it being kept if you missed the first one, now it's you keep the first tabernacles, but you also are supposed to keep the second one. It's kind of like in the Torah where the second Shavuot isn't voluntary; it's also mandatory because each Shavuot is different first fruits. Shavuot being a feast of weeks, so the first Shavuot is for the feast of first fruits of wheat, and the second one is for wine, and the third one is for oil. And these were laws originally part of the law of Moses itself, and it's found in the copies of the law of Moses in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, so in the calendar documents of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Feast of Purim is not there, and neither is Hanukkah, but neither is Second Passover, which we know is a valid feast. And in some calendar documents, all three Shavuots are mentioned, but in other calendar documents, only the one is mentioned and the other two are not. And then we have the fact that the Book of Esther was not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we say, people say, well, they didn't have it because it had an extra holy day that they disagreed with. That's speculation. We don't have proof of that. It's a theory that, seems in some ways to be potentially supported, but in actuality, there's no reason to come to that conclusion because we say the Book of Esther was not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's true, but you know what else wasn't found? A large portion of most of the books of the Bible. When I say that, what I mean is most of the books of the Old Testament were found, but in their being found, they are barely found. Fragments. Book of Ezra and Nehemiah probably weren't found at all. There was like a couple of tiny fragments that might be from Ezra or Nehemiah. Chronicles, we have like one fragment which might be from Chronicles, or it actually might be from Samuel. It's not clear. So there's nothing of First Chronicles, and Second Chronicles is like barely preserved at all. So did the Dead Sea Scroll writers they didn't accept Chronicles? Well, no. It's just that they didn't have as many copies of it because it wasn't as important a book to them. So because the Dead Sea Scrolls, what was preserved was it's random. The Dead Sea Scroll writers weren't like 2,000 years from now, the Dead Sea Scrolls will be discovered. So we got to make sure this number of copies of Isaiah we're going to put right here, so that when they find the Dead Sea Scrolls, they'll have this many copies because they'll know Isaiah is the most important book. Oh, and the Great Isaiah Scroll, that's the only one we're going to put in this jar perfectly preserved. All the other ones are going to not be perfectly preserved.
Seal it in nitrogen, vacuum
Yeah.
seal it.
That's the only one we want to preserve perfectly. All the other ones, that's okay. It doesn't make sense. So they just simply preserved their stuff for themselves, haphazardly, inconsistently, and through time decay, most of it has just been wiped out in the fragments. So First and Second Chronicles, it's not because they didn't accept it. It's just it wasn't as popular, so they didn't have as many copies, and so because of that, it wasn't preserved. Same thing with Book of Esther, Nehemiah, Ezra, the prophets, the minor prophets. So in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's something called Nahal, Hever, and a couple other things like Murabat. Those I don't regard as Dead Sea Scrolls because those are other sites. They're not from the Dead Sea Scroll area. They're from other regions that sometimes scholars group together as part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. There were other discoveries found in caves in farther away from the Qumran area of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and so they're sometimes classed with the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I don't regard them as Dead Sea Scrolls. So if you include those other scrolls, there's more preserved of some books like the Minor Prophets, the 12 smaller prophet books. But when you go to only the Dead Sea Scrolls and not those other sites, some of the prophets are barely preserved. There's barely any text of some of those prophets preserved. You have the Torah itself, which is preserved fairly well among the books, but it's also very fragmentary in certain places. And Judges is actually not preserved that well at all. It's preserved okay, but not that good. Joshua's preserved better. First and Second Samuel was preserved very well in the scrolls. Like I said, Kings not preserved almost much at all. It is preserved better than Chronicles, but Kings is poorly preserved in the scrolls. Very few copies. Let's see here. Job is preserved okay, but not that many copies. But we have one copy that preserves a good chunk of it. Let's see. Psalms preserved pretty well, but still a lot of Psalms are not preserved in the scrolls. Not because they didn't have those Psalms, just over time the copies deteriorated. So just because you don't have that Psalm in the scrolls doesn't mean that Psalm wasn't accepted by the Dead Sea Scroll people. Proverbs barely preserved in the scrolls. Ecclesiastes I don't think was preserved that well either. Solomon preserved okay. Lamentations preserved pretty good. Ruth I think is preserved pretty good. But when I say pretty good, it's not 100%, 50% roughly, kind of thing. So like half of these books, each book is missing at least for most of the time. So that doesn't give you confidence to say that, okay, well, because we didn't have a copy of Esther that was found in the scrolls, therefore it's was not accepted by them. Well, there's another document called what some scholars call Proto-Esther that was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls in one copy. And that book is very similar to the Book of Esther in some ways, but it's a different story entirely. It's a different Persian story. So why do they have only one copy of that? Or no, actually, there was a few copies of that, I think. But so it doesn't make sense to assume that they didn't accept Esther. So those are the biggest reasons why people might reject Esther. But I think when you evaluate it, it's not compelling. God was originally in the Book of Esther, just in those letters. And so let's see. Do we have any commentary on what they did to extend preservation? What kind of time they expected them to be able to last? No, we don't have. I mean, oh wait, we have commentary by modern people. We don't have ancient commentary on that, but we have modern scholars which tell us about some of these stuff. I don't have any specific sources on hand. There are some stuff about that, although they might be a little bit expensive books. You might find some of these books anywhere from $100 to $200-ish that talk about manuscript stuff. But yeah, so anyway, that's kind of like an overview of Esther and the differences. But now we don't have too much time left for part one, and we haven't even actually looked at my version yet. But the good news is we will be able to kind of skim through a lot of it in some ways. Let's see here.
Just so you guys know as listeners what the plan is here. We're gonna go for another 30-40 minutes, and then we're gonna pick up again tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. just so you understand what the plan is here.
I was literally looking for my phone, and I'm using my phone. I'm using my phone to do the live stream, and I was looking for it. I was like, where'd my phone go?
Yeah, can you guys help me find my phone?
Yeah. You ever have that happen to you where you're actually holding your phone and where's my phone? You're holding it in your hand. Oh man. But so I'm laughing for a second. I'm gonna approve this in my group, but the person's name is Joseph Flavius. That sounds like they're claiming to be Josephus.
Yeah.
But they wanted to post something in my group. Anyways, so I'm gonna download the PDF file to send it to you because I want you guys to see part one of my process and what I had to do to fix it. What my friend did. So let's see here. I just had to, while I'm looking this up, was there other things stated by anyone or no?
So Vinny, asks, like, what do you think? Could we draw a parallel basically between Haman and Hitler?
No, Hitler was a good guy. I'm just joking. Um, Hitler was a Christian. He was a good Catholic. Uh,
I read
but
that most churches actually supported him.
uh, the Catholic Church was shockingly neutral to supporting of Hitler. And there's people who try to say that Hitler was a fake Christian or whatever, but there's no reason to believe that. I think he was a Christian in his own way, just like there's a lot of Christians out there who believe whatever they want to believe, and they find justification in Scripture. Hitler quoted passages of, like, he quoted how Jesus overturned the tables, and was angry and was wrathful as justification of a version of our faith, which isn't, like, pacifistic, because a lot of Christians are pacifists, but there's things in the New Testament that seem to suggest that Yeshua wasn't this lovey-dovey guy. He believed in justice and vengeance sometimes, and so Hitler appealed to that as a justification, one of his justifications. But obviously, of course, Hitler was on the wrong side of history. But I think it's unfair to just be like, to demonize someone to the point of saying, "Oh, they were pure evil." They did not. They weren't a Christian or whatever. I don't believe he's saved at all. No, 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 no. A Christian means someone who professes faith in Christ. It doesn't mean they will be saved by Christ, because it says in Matthew, many will say to me, did we not do these things, these wonderful things? And he'll say to me, go away, I never knew you, you who were evil, who broke the law. And of course, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. So Hitler is cursed for what he has done. But
I would say it depends on how you define Christian. If you define Christian as someone who professes Christ, then yes.
I believe you have to do it that way, because there's no proof of who is born again and who's not. Everyone claims to be born again, or not everyone, but almost everyone who's a Christian, who professes faith in Christ, says they're saved. So, to me, it makes more sense just to say a Christian is someone who professes, and then, we'll find out on Judgment Day who makes it and who doesn't.
I'll just say a true Christian, from my point of view, is someone who goes by the teachings of Jesus and follows his example. With that definition, I would say that Hitler, even though he professed to be, he certainly wasn't in that point, in that way.
But if that's the case, then
yeah, let's have fun with this.
I'm just trying to find the thing. But if that's the case, I would make the argument. So this is not intended in any way as a offense or insult to you, Christopher. But I go from the perspective of assuming by default that someone's not born again, even if they believe they are. So you've shared your experience from your story. About how you came to faith and everything. And I believe you're completely sincere in all that. But I don't assume, from my perspective, that you are correct when you say, like you've said before, when I first became born again. So there's two things that I don't assume about that. One is, I don't know for sure that you are born again. But secondly, if you are born again, I don't know when you became born again. You may not have been, you may be born again right now, but you may not have become born again when you thought you did. It only might have happened later. But it's not my place to be the one to tell you, oh no, you're not born again, or it's not my place to try to tell everybody what their place is before God. People can judge for themselves their lives, and then on Judgment Day they'll be judged. But what I can tell people is what I believe Scripture says is required to be born again. And because Scripture places such a high standard for becoming born again, in my opinion, That's why I assume most people are not born again, because that high standard usually is not met when people claim to be born again. But I don't know fully everything about you, so it's like, and like I said, it's not like I'm not trying to like go after all people I know who claim to be Christians and say, or who claim to be born again, and say, okay, I got to prove this guy's not born again. That's not my purpose. But I do think it's important for people to double check themselves just in case, because maybe someone's not born again and they think they are, just as Scripture warns us. So because of all that, because I believe the standard for being born again is much higher, and like what you said, following what Yeshua said, but to me, following means you're perfectly doing it. And most believers, even amongst people who try to follow Torah, will tell you that they don't perfectly follow it. They'll say, they still sin sometimes. So to me, those people, if they're not perfectly following it, and they'll sometimes do something that they know is wrong, that's a large percentage of believers who will do something they know is wrong, even if they are trying to keep Torah. They're trying, but sometimes they fall into sin. From my perspective, they're not. That person's not born again because they're knowingly doing something that they know is wrong. But I would call them Christians or Messianics. Some people don't like the term Christian, but I would say they're a believer. But I think it's more than just a trying. According to the New Testament, Yeshua had disciples, but some of those disciples rejected what he said. They didn't accept some of the things he said. You remember in the earlier period of his ministry, he would teach things that were controversial, and it says his disciples didn't accept it, or they didn't like what he said. Most of his disciples didn't accept it. So I think you can have a Christian, or whatever you want to call it, who may not be born again, or who may not be following correctly. So that's why I think it's a little bit gray or blurry to say this person was not a Christian because they were not following perfectly. Because if you apply that standard, well, then I would say the vast majority of people I know, so long as they claim themselves to not perfectly be keeping what is commanded of them, then by that standard, they're also not a Christian. So I don't know if that makes sense to you at all, or
It's a tough one because you ask 1,000 people what a Christian, how you define Christian, you might get 1,000 different answers. So
yeah,
it's
that's
a
true.
tough one.
But clearly, the type of Christian or type of person that Hitler was is a very different thing than the type of people who are trying to strive for Torah, or even regular Christians who aren't necessarily keeping Torah, but who are trying to be loving towards others. They're clearly of a different caliber morally. So obviously, there's some, we'll be judged how righteous we are. So the Christians who are more righteous will be judged more righteously. They'll be judged better than the Christians or the people who claim to be Christians. They'll be judged less good because they were more evil. But so let's see here. So because of the timing, we will be doing we'll do like a brief review here. Okay. So I'm going to send you the original PDF that my friend sent me that he worked on for me. So I want you to open that once I send it to you. Let's see, I'll just save it. I'll save it as Esther original draft. I haven't sent it to you yet, but I'm about to. I just got to open my Gmail. So after tonight's over, I'm going to go right back to try to working on finishing my version of Esther, part 2. The second part of the process, because it is not fully finished yet. So of the Book of Esther, I have finished chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 10, and I've finished all the extra chapters except the very last parts of the 5th extra chapter. There's like five or 7 verses of that last extra chapter that I haven't finished. But so the big ones that I need to do, chapter 4 is not that long. Chapter 8's a bit long, but chapter 9 is the longest. So that I'm going to try my best to finish it in time for tomorrow, because it'll be 7 o'clock, right?
Yeah, 7 o'clock tomorrow.
And then once I have it finished, it'll be, I'll present it. I won't, like, how I talked about the reconstructed thing?
Yeah.
That's going to be part 3 of my process. Part 3 of the process is after I do the second part, it's going to be the actual translation. Because I'm not actually translating for the most part in my version that I made. So someone might say, oh, you didn't actually translate, so then what did you do? Well, I did a lot because I consulted the Hebrew text to line up the Septuagint much more accurately with the Masoretic text. So that was a very lengthy process, and it is not easy to do, and it does require some good knowledge and understanding of how texts work. So I will send you now that PDF file. Esther original draft. So it should be in your email. So at first, once you get that, I'll have you pull it up on the screen, and we'll just kind of scroll through, and we're going to see that it's quite different from each other. The lines are very different, and they look like they have tons of differences.
Okay, just got it. Give me a second. Okay.
I'm looking at the live video, and it looks like delayed. Maybe it's on my screen. I don't know. Oh, it's not that delayed. All right. Anyways, it's like a 5-second delay.
All right. So there you are.
So what I basically want you to do is I'm going to have you scroll like not. Let's see. So you can. How will I have you scroll? I think what I'll just have you do is, like, instead of scrolling necessarily, you could click. So the way that would work is you just, like, below the gray bar, not right below it, but like somewhere, anywhere below it on that bar thing, you can just do one click, and then it'll bring it down a little bit.
Like so, that, you mean?
Yeah. Wait, hold on.
Or just page down, or?
I'll just you know what? I'll just have you. No, that's okay. I'll just have you scroll with your because
you think scrolling is kind of hard to follow?
No, I think it's better to just do the scrolling. But so don't like constantly scroll. But like what I'll have you do is like, you'll show what's on the page for like a small amount of time, and then scroll until we don't see what we just saw, and now anything we see is new stuff.
Yeah.
So this first is chapter A, which is one of the extra chapters, and and you can see that that's not in. Oh yeah, and there's 4 lines of text. The top line is Masoretic. The second line is what's called the Alpha text. The third line is the Septuagint, and the fourth line is the Old Latin. So this is my friend's version that he did for me, and he tried to line it up as best he could. He did a good job, but it
So
looks a lot.
what we're looking at here, we don't even see, like, there's no first line, right? That would be the Masoretic, you said?
Correct. This is not in the Masoretic text at all.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
so you can scroll down now. So this is all chapter A, and you can see now sometimes the Old Latin line is not there. You can see. So all right. So keep scrolling.
So the last line is the Old Latin line.
Yes. Now, as you're seeing, you look and you see he's marking things like. So stop for a second with verse 7. So he's marking differences, like he's marking darkness as different than dark. See, he's marking that as a difference. So I don't agree with that. I think he was marking too many things different like that, because he thought, darkness is different than dark. So so I had to clean up stuff like that. So anyway, so you keep scrolling. Oh yeah, verse 8. You see that bracket? Like it's not a regular bracket, but it's like a squiggly bracket.
Yeah.
The squiggly bracket tells you that same text is elsewhere found in a different version in a different place. So it's like rearranged in a different place. So anyways, you can keep going down now.
So there are a lot of differences between these manuscripts.
Yes, at least it seems to be, but like, okay, let's say verse 10. Exalted, if you start at verse 10, it says, exalted and swallowed versus devoured versus consumed. Okay, so most likely it's the same basic text. So first, what I want to do, let me see. You know that Nets version?
Yeah.
Go to that and go to verse 10 of that beginning one, and let's see what it says.
So where would that be?
Devoured. Actually, that's a time where it is. Sorry, that's one that's not gonna work. But basically, what I'm trying to say here is that you can go back to the other one we were on.
Oh.
But basically, what I was trying to say is that so the alpha text comes directly from the Nets version, the PDF. But Nets also has what basically is the Brenton version, but it translates that Greek text its own way. So when there appears to be a difference between Brenton and the alpha text, sometimes if you go to the Nets, the same exact wording will be used for both alpha and the text that's equivalent to the Brenton. So because of that, I can then look and say, oh, okay, the alpha text is actually saying the same exact thing Brenton's saying here. So I'll then alter the alpha translation from Nets to be worded the exact same way as the Brenton translation, because the Nets has confirmed that they're the same text. So that's one of the things I did, were to clean up the alpha text to line it up with the Brenton. I look and see if it's the same text of the Brenton text in the Nets version, because Nets translates the Brenton Greek text with different words, but sometimes it translates it with the same words it translates the alpha text version. But so if you use the wording of the Brenton translation and compare it with the alpha translation, it looks like they're different words. But when you look at the PDF of the Nets, you see, oh, actually, it's the same exact word. It's just a different translation. The Brenton is an older translation, so sometimes it uses older, more archaic words, and it's not actually a difference. And translators can be free sometimes with how they translate. Okay, so now you can keep scrolling. Now this is all chapter A, as it's called.
So the first is Masoretic. The second, I'm sorry, what was that?
The second is alpha text, and the
And the
third
third?
is Septuagint proper, Brenton. And then the fourth line is that old Latin PDF.
So the
Now,
alpha, that's the nets.
the alpha is the right column of the nets PDF, because there's two columns in the nets PDF. The left column is its translation of the Greek text that Brenton translates.
Okay.
So basically, the Greek text that Brenton translates is a completely different Greek text of the alpha text. And the nets includes both Greek texts, but it gives their translation, and their translation differs for the Brenton Greek text. Their translation differs from Brenton's own translation. But I can use the nets PDF as a comparison purposes to see where the alpha text actually lines up with the Greek text behind Brenton.
So you say the right column, which would be like where it says alpha right here.
Yes, right? Yeah, exactly.
And so they're both English translations of two different Greek texts.
Right.
Like on the one on the left side where it says Old Greek, if I understand you correctly, this is the same Greek text as Brenton, just translated differently.
It's the same or almost exactly the same, because a lot of the Greek manuscripts are very close. Sometimes have a few differences. But Brenton's translation, I believe, was Codex Vaticanus. The Old Greek here might not be 100% from Codex Vaticanus, but all the readings of Codex Vaticanus are almost identical with what they call the Old Greek. Scholars basically reconstructed Old Greek using the Greek manuscripts, and the Old Greek they reconstructed is extremely close to Vaticanus, but it's not always the same.
And alpha is
some other text. It actually tells you at the top. So if you go to the top of it, it gives an introduction, and it says the second Greek version is known as the alpha text and is printed on the bottom of the page with the siglum L. Oh, that's in the official Göttingen thing. Let's see. Does it say how many manuscripts? Okay, yeah, the alpha text. If you scroll down, the alpha text of Esther is a second Greek version preserved in only 4 manuscripts. It is a significantly shorter telling of the story than both the Hebrew and the other Greek version, and its versification differs from both. So yeah, and it tells you that, like, does it say percentage? I don't know. I think I've seen before that there's like a huge percentage. It's much shorter. Let's see. Oh, let's see here. Oh yeah. So on page it says 425 in the PDF. So the second Greek text of Esther. Do you see the numbers at the top of it? So if you go to, it says 425. That'll be on page 2. So yeah, the second paragraph, the second Greek text of Esther, the AT or the L text is shorter than the Old Greek text and the Hebrew Masoretic text by about 20%. It represents only about half the text found in the Masoretic text. More often than not, the Alpha text follows the word order of the Masoretic text and agrees with it about as often as does the Old Greek text. The primary difference between the Alpha text and the Masoretic text is the many small pluses and minuses. Most of the significant pluses and minuses in the Alpha text compared to the Masoretic text are found in chapters 8 to 10. Funnily enough, I haven't even done 8 and 10 and 9 yet, so I haven't yet seen the main differences, apparently. But so anyway, they give their own theories on why there's differences and things like that. Anyway, so
the first line First line Masoretic, second line Alpha, and then
Yes.
Brenton,
Brenton,
and then Old Latin.
correct.
All
So
right.
you keep going down, and you see Old Latin is not there in these verses. Old Latin does not preserve the intrusive repetition of the story of Mordecai, because it doesn't make sense to tell the story of Mordecai before the story starts. And so the Old Latin probably removed it, because the Old Latin was like, oh, that doesn't make sense. So they removed that. Okay, so now you go to chapter 1, and you're seeing, okay, there's a lot of, it looks like there's a lot of differences. And take a look here for a second. Hold on. If you pause at verse 1, oh man, why is it going like this? Hold on. All right. I guess I just have to look at your screen. I was trying to look on the computer, but my computer is not behaving. All right, so basically, look at line 1 of verse 1, which says, Ahasuerus, which reigned from India. No, I'm sorry. You were on the right thing.
Okay.
Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even to Ethiopia, over 107 and 20 provinces. At line 2, 127 lands from India to Ethiopia. Line 3, Artaxerxes, who ruled over 127 provinces from India. And then the 4th line, Artaxerxes, who reigned from India to Ethiopia, over 127 districts. Oh yeah, and the 2nd line, if you look, it says, were subjected to him. So from India to Ethiopia, were subjected to him on the next line.
Mm-hmm.
So that looks like, whoa, that's very different, right? Well, no, it's not different. It's the same exact text. So go to my version, and that same verse, and now you're going to see that same verse has been cleaned up. So it's chapter 1, verse 1, not chapter 1a, but chapter 1b. I mark it as chapter 1b.
Do I go down further?
Yeah, it's 1b.
Okay.
And you see mine looks much more neat than his. Okay, so now verse 1. Look at verse 1. And it came to pass, after these things is added, in the days of, okay, so the first 2 have Xerxes, and then 3rd and 4th have Artaxerxes, and then this is Artaxerxes, which reigned. Okay, and then the next one below, from India, Masoretic has even, all the other versions has to Ethiopia, 127 provinces. But look, the Septuagint, which is the 3rd line, does not have to Ethiopia. It just has India. So if you go back to his version, just for, and look how messy it looks. And then you go back to mine, and you see it looks very orderly and neat. So that's what I've been doing. I've been taking what he did and like cleaning it up so that it reflects correctly what the actual versions are saying. And then you're gonna see weird things like the 5th line, right? You probably saw the 5th line and wondering what's that.
Yeah.
The 5th line is fragments from Josephus. So if Josephus says something that kind of seems like it's supporting a particular text, then I include it. So based on Josephus' text, it looks like, Josephus says Artaxerxes, so he always identifies it as Artaxerxes. And then from India, instead of he doesn't say from India and just leaves it at that. He says India to Ethiopia. So clearly he had a text that was not the Septuagint in this case, and it was the full text, even to Ethiopia. So we're running out of time here for today, but there's one part that I wanted to show you. It's a little bit lower. I believe it's where it says 180 days. If you want to go out of this for a second into the Masoretic or King James version, and I believe it's the place which says uh, it's search just for days for the King James.
Esther chapter
So
1.
I forget. Try chapter 1 and do days. I'll see it when you have it there. It'll have a number of days. Okay, that's what it is. This is it. So it's verse 4. So can you actually go to Blue Letter Bible and you go to that verse? That was chapter 1, right?
1 verse 4. Okay.
Yeah. So we'll show the Hebrew. Now look, it mentions days both time. If you go up, you don't have to look at that. If you go up to the actual Hebrew, it mentions days both time. So I'm not sure how much you know of the Hebrew, but basically it is on the very left on the second line. That word is day. Okay,
Yom.
the word right next to it, to your right, that's many. No, wait, I'm sorry. That's 100, right? Or what does it say? 100? Does
Yeah,
it say?
100. Yeah.
Okay, and then the word to the right of that is
Four
what is
score.
it? 80.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then to the right of that is many,
Yeah.
and then to the right of that, days.
Mhm.
So it mentions day twice. So it says days many, 180 day. So how would you translate that? So if you go up, look at the translation. They translate it as many days, 104 score days. But it doesn't say that. If you look, it says, so you see where it said many? That word right next to it, yeah, where you had highlighted before, right next to it, that's the word for days. And look, it has a plural. It has the word, and then it has that plural. So in Hebrew, a word becomes plural when it's im. So so the plural at the end of masculine words is im, like Elohim
Just
and Bani.
so this little looks like comma, the yod, and this looks like a box is mem sofit,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yep.
And so every word that has this on, like this one here, is
Um,
plural.
not every word, but most words. Yeah, yeah. So
Okay,
if it has it
so
at the end, then that's gonna almost always be masculine plural. But sometimes it's deceptive, and it's actually part of the root word. So, like for example, there's a word that's spelled shin yod mem, and the yod mem is not the plural.
hmm,
Um, so there are some unique cases of different words like that. But for the most part, if you're going to see a yod mem at the end like that, that's the plural marker. So if you look, the very last word day, that's the singular. That's not a plural.
hmm,
And yet in the translation, they translate it. Um, they translate it uh, as days both times in the translation,
yeah.
plural. Now the Septuagint, if you look at the Brenton translation of the Septuagint, not in mine, but in the actual tab. Um,
Okay. It
no, I'm sorry, not in mine, but the
oh, I see.
in the Brenton tab for if you go to Brenton's version.
On this website.
No, no, sorry. On the other tab which has the Septuagint. So the way they translate it, it's still chapter 1, in verse 4. They just translated the 1 days during 180 days. So the evidence suggests that in this case, the Hebrew was just confusing, and it's like, okay, we're just going to translate it, simplify it, and translate it as 180 days. But so the way I would translate it, if you go back to the actual Hebrew text, so I would translate it essentially as 180 days being the time. So the second instance, day, that word sometimes actually means time. It doesn't always mean day. Sometimes it actually does mean time in certain instances. And so I would essentially translate it as 180 days, many days. No, so the translation would be many days, 180 being the time. So so the actual phrase, if you scroll up to the actual translation, so when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty, many days. Wait, sorry. Wait, let me see the Hebrew. Scroll a little bit down. Okay, see it says bet. They often translate bet as when here. So let me see the translation again. So instead of saying when, it would be like in the showing of the riches of his glorious kingdom. Basically, it's saying the honor of his excellent majesty was many days. And then it says, how many days? 180 days was the length of time. It's kind of weird that the Hebrew phrases it like that. You would think they could just say it was 180 days, but the Hebrew text wanted to tell you that they did it many days, and then in like parentheses, 180 being the amount, being the time. So the original clause is just telling you it was many days, and then in parentheses, it's telling you 180 days was the length of those many days. So that's kind of how I would essentially translate it. But so anyway, it's just kind of wrap it up here. Was there any final questions or statements of questions that were asked earlier that weren't addressed, or anything?
Yeah, we'll take a few more questions, and we're going to wrap it up and continue tomorrow at 7 p.m. Again, if you have any questions specifically for me or Onieh, just put it at Christopher or at Onieh, and we'll get to that.
I'll try my computer again, but if it happens again, then we'll just switch to the phone like we did this time. I haven't been able to see the comments since I'm not on my. Oh yeah, I guess I could click this.
I'm just kind of looking through the comments here. Vinny says, yeah, you can see God's hand in the events of the Book of Esther.
Well, we're gonna see that in full detail tomorrow. We're gonna see the full story, where and I'm also gonna point out to you guys where the Masoretic text, in my opinion, is superior to the Septuagint in the differences. So,
Tower time.
When did he say? When did he make that comment? Because we were talking about the Old Latin.
Yeah, that was earlier on.
Okay, so maybe that was before we mentioned it. Maybe.
Yeah, I have that at like a quarter to 4 actually.
Okay. Well, we did talk about the Latin version, of course. There's two Latin versions. There's the Vulgate, which is the Masoretic text with the 6 additional chapters added at the very end as an appendix. Which is actually surprising to me. Like, okay, so basically, I was always critical of that. You know, like they're just like, oh, we're just going to take the additions and lump them all together and put them at the end. But it's actually surprisingly close to my theory that there was an original letter that had most of those additions in one place. Oh yeah, and in my version of the Book of Esther that I will eventually reconstruct, the 2 letters will remain in their place. They're not going to be removed. So the letter in chapter 3 will stay there, and the letter in chapter 8 will stay there. But everything, all the other editions will not be included in the text in their places. They'll be reconstructed as a separate letter. What non-canonical books were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls? That's a great question, which deserves a 2-hour video. There's just so many. I can very briefly, say it like. So there's basically extra books for almost every individual. There's fragments of Jeremiah that are not in our copies of Jeremiah. There's fragments of Daniel not in our copies of Daniel. There's a second Ezekiel book called the Ezekiel Apocryphon. There's Testaments of the Patriarchs, fragments of the Testaments, Testament of Levi, Testament of Naphtali, and fragments of the Testaments of Moses' Moses' father Amram, and Moses' grandfather Kohath. We didn't even have that before. Book of Jubilees, Book of Enoch is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Book of Giants is a version of, or not a version, but an extra Enoch book. We've got some extra Psalms. There's extra Psalms of David, potentially some extra Psalms of Solomon. We don't know for sure if they're by Solomon or David. And there's Genesis Apocryphon, which was written by Noah. We have a Book of Noah. Book of Abraham was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, included in what's called the Genesis Apocryphon. Book of Lamech. So these are all extra, what will be called non-canonical. Then there's like books like the War Scroll, Community Rule, Damascus Document. These are documents of the Essenes about their community. And there's commentaries. They're called Pesher. Many of them are called Peshers. They're basically interpretations, but they are given a weight of authority. Basically, people in the Essene group were considered leaders, and their interpretations were considered trustworthy, and they gave like the authoritative interpretation. Many times the interpretation is done in a way similar to the New Testament, how they reinterpret things from the Old Testament to apply to New Testament events. The Essenes did something similar and wrote commentaries about it. They have calendar documents, and so that's the main gist. I might have missed a few, but they have a longer version of the Law of Moses called the Temple Scroll. Book of Tobit they have. So that covers most of the stuff that's considered non-canonical.
All right. So that's the only questions I see that are directed specifically for us here.
Let me see. I'm just quickly looking myself. Oh, I don't know how to say it. Chanda Pinto. I know them. I've interacted with them before, but I'm not sure of the pronunciation. But basically, they said, interesting statement. Septuagint version, you have the name of God mentioned over 50 times. Yeah, and you have the laws of Moses praised throughout, with reference to religion all throughout. Corey Barton says, I came in here. Is this guy trying to alter the Bible? I am trying to restore the Bible, but in so doing, there may be times where I inadvertently alter it to say a bad thing or incorrect thing. But I'm going to give you all the readings in the text so you can decide for yourself which reading is correct. But yeah, so to circle back to Tower Time's statement about the Latin version, the old Latin version is what he's referring to. It does have a community prayer that's not in the other versions. It's not in the Septuagint. It's not in the Masoretic or the Alpha text. It's the only one that has that prayer, where it's the prayer of the Jews. Like, I said the prayer of Mordecai and the prayer of Esther are included. Well, the prayer of the rest of the Jews is also found in the Old Latin version. So I don't see anything else.
Okay, well, so we'll wrap it
So,
up for tonight.
what did you think? What did you think of today's thing? Did you find it interesting, Christopher?
I found it interesting. I learned. I'm learning things myself. So yeah, definitely. Um, and I'm sure everybody. I think everybody else that would be listening to this would also say that as well. Lots of interesting things. So we will continue, Lord willing, tomorrow at 7 p.m. at Eastern time. So for those of you who are interested in picking up at where we left off here and continuing, and if you have any more questions that come to your mind, make sure you bring them to the table tomorrow. Again, we're going live 7 p.m.
You don't have to give the info for me for like my channels and stuff because we'll just be on tomorrow. So, but there was one other thing I just saw here that I could answer, and that's about the Dead Sea Scrolls. They said, would the Qumran Bible be close to the Dead Sea Scrolls? So I just wanted to answer that because the person doesn't seem to know. And that's a very easy question to answer. So Qumran is the site where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. So if you hear anyone say the Qumran Bible, that's identical with the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls is just the scrolls that were found at Qumran, or the Bible that was found at Qumran. So it's the exact same thing. So it wouldn't be close. It is the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're one and the same.
Awesome.
So
Okay.
we'll see you tomorrow, guys, at 7 o'clock.
Thanks, Onieh. And also, your information is actually in the
Oh yeah,
description
that's
box
fine.
anyway. Yeah. So in the meantime, if any of you want to watch any more or interact with Onieh on the Facebook group, or whatever else, the links are in the description. So, and we'll pick it up again tomorrow evening. So again, Onieh, thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great night.
Thank you too. Blessings, blessings. And as always, I pray for everyone that's listening, everyone that's watching. The Lord bless you and keep you, make his face to shine upon you, lift up his countenance upon you, and give you wonderful, wonderful shalom. Amen. Amen. See you guys tomorrow. Thank you, Onieh.